What Does All This Love Amount To? Written by Sebastian Fantastic. Read by Arashi. It's a beautiful spring day. He's on the back of a horse. His dear friend Hubert von Vestra is finally joining him on one of these expeditions. And somehow, Ferdinand von Eyre is miserable. Ferdinand had been ecstatic when Hubert had approached him the evening before and asked to join him on his outing today. When Ferdinand had eagerly agreed, he did not think it would turn out like this. When Ferdinand asks if Hubert is enjoying the spring weather, Hubert mutters something about the sun being too bright. When he asks about Hubert's opinion on the field of flowers they pass, Hubert complains about how thick the air is with pollen. When mentioning that the small lake they are riding to is nearby, Hubert just scowls and ducks his head. It is not as if Ferdinand asked Petra 3 times last night what the weather might be like today, or that he spent several hours of prime sleeping time planning the exact route so that he might share this field of flowers with Hubert, nor had he debated the location to which they would ride, taking into account Hubert's difficulty with horseback riding, his aversion to heights, and his choleric temperament that was agitated with the heat of the late spring morning. Ferdinand bites back a sigh as Hubert begins to chide at his horse, a very sweet pinto gelding named Bartholomew. He is one of a handful of non-war horses who can stand a magic user as a rider, and, of the lot, he is the most affable, which is why Ferdinand saddled up Bart for the Bert. Not that Ferdinand would ever call Hubert that to his face, but Happy is good at coming up with nicknames that stick. She might even rival Dorothea for that. Ferdinand has not been gifted a nickname yet, but he tries not to let that bother him. "Stubborn beast," Hubert mutters, and Ferdinand finally takes pity on poor Bartholomew. "Do not take your poor riding skills out on Bartholomew. It is not his fault." Ferdinand pulls back on his own reins, and Matilda slows so Bart can come up beside her. "Speak for yourself. Your horse isn't shying and sidestepping every few meters." Hubert stares, his voice gravelly with frustration. "It is because you keep tensing your wrists and pulling on the reins. When you do that with both hands, he stops because he is polite. If you do it with one hand, he thinks you want him to turn." Ferdinand reaches out to push Hubert's wrists down, so they almost rest on his thighs. "There. That should be better. And stop flinching. He's not going to dump you to the dirt, though you might deserve it with how you are yanking on his poor mouth." Hubert flushes at Ferdinand's chiding, and Ferdinand feels himself start to blush. Hubert is the minister of the imperial house, and he is Edelgard's spymaster, and he is a general in Her Majesty's army. Even if he did need his riding posture corrected, he didn't need Ferdinand to be the one to do it. In fact, Hubert made it clear that Ferdinand baffles and frustrates him. It should be enough that Hubert has reached out in friendship, even if Ferdinand wishes it was something more. With a flick of his wrists, Ferdinand urges Matilda forward at a quicker pace, stepping away from Hubert. Hopefully at a greater distance, Hubert will assume that the blush on Ferdinand's cheeks is from the warmth of the spring day, and not because Ferdinand is thinking again about what it would feel like to caress that sharp face with bare hands. Ferdinand knows he has gotten away with it when Hubert ducks his head again, and then asks, "How long until we reach this hidden location you have kept secret from me? I really do hope this is not an attempt to assassinate me, Ferdinand. While I might enjoy the rest, now is not the time for such tricks." Ferdinand gapes for a moment, then catches the slight curl at the corner of Hubert's mouth, and the way his bright eyes dart over as if following, to see if his words have hit their mark. "I would never, Hubert. If I wanted you dead, I have had 6 chances in the heat of battle over the past month alone. Besides, if you are dead, who will listen to me ramble about the latest opera, or will share a dark brandy with me as a consolation after I am thoroughly trounced at chess?" If Hubert acknowledges their evening routines, Ferdinand thinks his heart might pound out of his chest. He knows they mean something more to him than they do to Hubert, and he worries if he admits it, it might drive Hubert away. Not because Hubert is vindictive, though he is clever enough to be if he wished. No, it is because Hubert is a gentleman, and if he learned his presence was hurting Ferdinand, he would remove himself from the equation. It would not help, because Ferdinand aches with yearning, even when Hubert is not around. It might be duller in his absence, but it is also colder, makes Ferdinand enjoy life less. At least with Hubert around, Ferdinand feels alive when the fire of wanting strokes. So He cannot allow Hubert to expound on their evening routines he himself has brought up. Ferdinand interrupts Hubert. "It is just ahead." He motions to a line of trees, willow and sweet gum, that hide away a small lake. Ferdinand has not shared this location with anyone, though it's a well-known spot for many of the townsfolk who live outside of Garrick Mach. It's only a 2-hour ride from the monastery and, back in their school days, Ferdinand had caught sight of a handful of couples when he would come out here to think and cool off after particularly heated arguments with Hubert. And now, he's bringing Hubert here. Ferdinand wonders if he will ever be able to look at a water lily or weeping willow again without thinking of Hubert. It's not as if Ferdinand doesn't find himself reminded of Hubert, no matter where he looks, though. It might be some practical association. The professor often assigns them to work together, clearing rubble from the monastery. So now even loose gravel reminds Ferdinand of Hubert's dexterous hands, wearing white gloves even as he shifts shattered stone. But esoteric things also bring Hubert to the forefront of Ferdinand's mind. A rare book for his expansive knowledge, expensive cologne for the unique scent he synthesizes himself, a pressed handkerchief for the neatness of his clothes. Ferdinand knows he is well and truly, absolutely hopeless, completely lost in his affection for Hubert. But how could anyone who got to see the truth underneath his prickly exterior not fall for someone as dedicated and compassionate and skilled as Hubert? He cares so much for the state of humanity and disregards his own comfort for their sake, even if he does dislike people in general, even half as much as he claims. He enjoys wielding a knife for his lady, and that too has its own allure. He is competent, distinguished, and perhaps slightly unhinged. They all are, what with the horrors of war being pressed on them at such an impressionable age, and Hubert has been bearing the brunt of it since he was perhaps 10 years old. Of course he would be a little fucked for that, and Ferdinand loves him. Quickly, Ferdinand reins back his feelings as they arrive at the edge of the lake. They will pass a perfectly average picnic lunch together. Then they will perhaps walk the edge of the lake, speaking of nothing of import, before mounting their steeds and returning to the monastery and to the drudgeries of daily life in a temporary war camp. And Ferdinand will not die of want today, like he has not perished for the past 5 months or more. It is as Ferdinand tells himself. They have a pleasant enough lunch, Hubert seeming more at ease now that he is on solid ground and not the back of a perfectly behaved horse. Ferdinand even talks him into taking a stroll around the edge of the pond, noting that Edelgard had dismissed them from duties for the entire day, and they will not be missed. Hubert smiles and corrects Ferdinand with an "Emperor Edelgard," and Ferdinand just juts his chin out and grins back, refusing to capitulate. They speak nothing of import, Hubert taking the time to note which plants in the area are toxic. Ferdinand even holds out a tree branch and leans out to swipe some lake grass that Hubert claims can be dried and ground up to add to a concoction to neutralize the taste of a rare poison he has recently acquired. Hubert takes the wet blades with a sigh, his gloves now damp. Ferdinand had not thought this far ahead. "What am I ever going to do with you, Ferdinand von Eyre?" Hubert says, fondness creeping into his usual snarky tone. "I do not know what you mean," Ferdinand says, ducking his head. Usually he would send back a barbed retort to keep Hubert on his toes, but today has been so different from the norm that he is feeling a bit off balance himself. "Your impulsivity, your need to impress everyone you come across. It's going to get you in trouble one day. It will be behind the final piece of silage that breaks the draft horse's spine." "I would never harm a draft horse," Ferdinand intones solemnly, and Hubert stares for a moment, before giving a barking laugh that startles a hidden pair of waterfowl. Ferdinand laughs along, because he cannot help but laugh for joy when he is the cause of Hubert's merriment. In his younger days, he would bristle when Hubert laughed at him. But now, Ferdinand thinks even a mocking cackle would have him laughing along. They stand for a moment, too close together for propriety, the back of Ferdinand's mind thinks. Their shirt sleeves are rustling together, for heaven's sake. Ferdinand tilts his chin up just a hair, catching the barest hint of cured meat and goat cheese and strawberry wine on Hubert's breath, as Hubert looks down at him, his eyes filling with some sort of emotion Ferdinand cannot piece. He thought he had catalogued all of Hubert's looks, his scowls of displeasure, and, even worse, his smiles of displeasure, the way his lips would flatten but his eyes would dance when Caspar tells a stupid joke during a war council, the way his tired face would brighten after a battle when all members of the strike force were accounted for. But this This was a new expression that Ferdinand had never caught before. For a moment, time seems to stretch, and everything else fades away. The hum of water insects melds with the rustle of the trees, and the warm spring light softens to a gentle haze. And all there is for Ferdinand is Hubert, looking down on him like Ferdinand is some secret Hubert wants to keep, all to himself. Then Hubert is clearing his throat and turning away, and Ferdinand is left with the feeling that he missed something, that there was something Hubert was waiting for him to catch on to, that he had ruined something beautiful.
We should be heading back. We do not want to be out past dark. Who knows what sort of beasts might roam these parts?
Hubert clears his throat again, so Ferdinand just nods. They could ride in circles for an hour or two and still make it back to the monastery before dark is out, so Ferdinand can only surmise that he has annoyed Hubert in some way. It happens often, so Ferdinand should be used to the bitter feeling in the back of his throat. Still, he clears his own throat as he picks up Bartholomew's reins.
Do you need a boost?
Hubert sends a glare Ferdinand's way.
Thank you, but no. Unfortunately, my legs are long enough to get me upon these cursed creatures.
Hubert takes the reins from Ferdinand's hands and reaches up to take hold of the saddle. Ferdinand steps towards Matilda, but continues to watch as Hubert climbs onto the saddle, for safety's sake, of course. As Hubert swings his admittedly long legs and admirably shaped leg over Bartholomew's back, he continues, "We really should be more afraid of creatures who not only have 4 sets of fingers, but also have chosen to walk on them." Ferdinand is listening to Hubert, of course, but some movement around the edge of the lake, where he had gathered the grass for Hubert, catches his eye, and it takes him a moment to figure out what he is seeing. A water snake, venomous by the size of its body to its head, has exited the lake and is making its way towards them. It is only as his brain is processing this information that Bartholomew also catches sight of the creature. Mages of all sorts he can stand, but Bart draws the line at creatures that slither on their bellies. Before he can shout a warning to Hubert, Bartholomew starts forward in blind terror. It feels as if everything has been slowed down by some sort of temporal magic, and Ferdinand is at the center of the dilation, for his responses are the slowest of all. Bart charges forward, and Hubert loses his balance, tipping forward. Ferdinand wants to warn him to give Bartholomew his head, and to hold on with his knees, but Hubert reacts how the most inexperienced riders do, by pulling back on the reins and shouting. Ferdinand is reaching out a hand feebly, as Bartholomew rears back, and Hubert is tossed from the horse's back, his feet knocked loose from the stirrups by his fall forward. It seems as though Hubert is falling forever, and Ferdinand can only watch, helpless. Hubert hits the ground, and time resumes its normal speed. Ferdinand yells at Hubert to let go of the reins, so he is not dragged or stepped on as he charges towards Hubert's prone form. Bartholomew dances antsily a few paces away, not willing to come closer to the snake's last known location, and Ferdinand is grateful. Hubert being thrown is bad enough. To also be trampled would ruin his association with horses forever. Ferdinand slides to his knees at Hubert's head. He can barely hear himself say Hubert's name. His heart is pounding so furiously in his ears. If Hubert were killed from this, Ferdinand would never forgive himself. Hubert is so pale, and for a moment, Ferdinand worries he is not breathing. But then Hubert opens his eyes, and Ferdinand has never been so glad to see that most beautiful shade of green. "Hubert, you've been thrown. Please do not move. It's not Bartholomew's fault, but there's a venomous snake around, and I was so worried you were killed." "Ferdinand," Hubert croaked, and for once in his goddess-damned life, Ferdinand shut up. "I love you," Hubert continued, reaching up for Ferdinand's face. Ferdinand could not process what Hubert had said. Surely he had misheard, or Hubert had hit his head in the fall. Instead, Ferdinand occupies his thoughts with making sure Hubert lies still, until Ferdinand has confirmed there is no damage to his spine and no broken bones. "Lie still, you daft man! You might have cracked your head or broken bones!" Ferdinand tries to push Hubert's hands down, but Hubert just inhales, his breath rattly in his chest, as if it is the first oxygen he's had in a very long time. Then grabs at Ferdinand's face. "If I lay still, how am I supposed to do this?" Hubert pulls Ferdinand closer, and now Ferdinand is the one who cannot breathe, as Hubert fits their mouths together. The kiss is gentle and tentative. Hubert's mouth is so soft against Ferdinand's. Ferdinand has to close his eyes because it is as if there are galaxies exploding to life in his vision. Branches of warmth sprout out from every point where Hubert is touching him, and he cannot help but to push back. He slips one hand behind Hubert's head to cradle him and relieve the muscles in his neck. His other hand flounders aimlessly until it rests on Hubert's chest. He can feel Hubert's heartbeat, the rapid pace from the adrenaline of the fall, and perhaps, if Ferdinand can allow himself to preen for a moment, from the kiss. Ferdinand had expected a brief, chaste kiss, perhaps an additional cheek caress if Hubert was feeling particularly generous, but Hubert kept them pressed together. He shifted minutely so that he could get Ferdinand's bottom lip between his own. Then those lips parted, and a thin tongue ran hesitantly against the seam of Ferdinand's mouth, and Ferdinand was on fire. To keep himself grounded as he opened his mouth in invitation, he poured a small healing spell onto Hubert's cheek, searching for anything to repair along his spinal cord. When he found nothing, he ran his other hand through the short hair along the back of Hubert's head, then cast another healing spell to make sure there was no swelling or damage above his collar. Finally, too soon, Hubert pulled back, gasping for breath. Ferdinand found his lungs were also heaving. Perhaps the hammering of his heart and the flopping of his stomach was making it difficult for his lungs to inflate. "Did you just heal me while I was kissing you?" Hubert asked, his face twisted in a disbelieving grin. "You could have broken your back!" Ferdinand blustered, now unsure where to put his hands. He settled for wringing them on his lap as he kneeled over Hubert. Hubert flopped back to the ground. "No, I just had the wind knocked out of me twice. Ferdinand, Hubert." "No, I just had the wind knocked out of me twice. Ferdinand." "Hubert!" Ferdinand had not meant to interrupt him. I never intended for this to happen. I've been in love with you for some time now, and..." Hubert stares up at Ferdinand as he stares down, both of their words landing at the same time. "You love me?" Ferdinand breathes. "I wish to forget this," Hubert says, as if his world was ending. Never. Ferdinand will never forget this moment in his whole life, and he does the only thing he can think to do to convey this to Hubert. Kiss him again. Hubert leans up into the kiss, but lets Ferdinand lead, and after a moment of awkward kneeling, Ferdinand cannot help it. He is acting on instinct as he swings his leg over top of Hubert, as if he is mounting a horse with very short legs, and pushing Hubert into the grass where a cottonmouth might be waiting to strike at any moment. As if he is reading Ferdinand's mind, Hubert pushes Ferdinand back a hair's breadth. "You said there was a venomous snake around here?" "Yes," Ferdinand says, scrambling to his feet. "Good. Let's catch it, and I can express its fangs to get a sample." Ferdinand pulls Hubert to his feet, rolling his eyes. Of course that is Hubert's line of reason. This is the man he is in love with. The man who loves him back. Of course that is the first thing you think about after stealing my first kiss, you rake. Ferdinand grins, so Hubert knows his words hold no bite. Hubert grins back, a full, toothsome smirk that makes Ferdinand's lungs feel as if he were flying too high on the back of a wyvern. Hubert takes his hand and brings the back of his gloved knuckles up to his lips. "Ferdinand?" His tone holds an unmasked request, and Ferdinand knows he will never be able to deny this impish man anything. So he promises. "Yes, dear? Anything." Hubert's grin is predatory now, and Ferdinand knows he has fallen into a trap, and he has never been so happy to be ensnared in his life. "Promise we do not have to ride home. Let's just walk." Ferdinand smiles back. Not on his life.